Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
With one backward look at the bowery suburbs of Damascus and the street that was peopled only by the long, faint shadows of crescent moon, Selim dropped from the high wall among the leafing almonds and flowering lilacs of Abdur Ali's garden. The night was almost sultry, and the air was steeped with the distilled languor of voluptuous perfume. Even if he'd been in some other garden, in another city, Selim could not have breathed that perfume without thinking of Zoraida, the young wife of Abdur Ali. Evening after evening, for the past fortnight, during her lord and master's absence, she had met him among the lilacs, till he had grown to associate the very odour of her hair and the savour of her lips with their fragrance.
Hello friends, and thanks for joining us today on Season 2, Episode 6 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was author Simon Bleaken, reading the opening paragraph of the first story that we're going to be covering today. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poyton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yes, we're doubling up again today. We've got two rather short stories, one of which is very sort of atypical. It's a rather strange one. But yeah, we're looking at The Kiss of Zoraida and The Face by the River.
Yes, I don't think either of which I read before, though The Face by the River seemed very familiar to me. So
No.
I perhaps maybe have read it somewhere, but I don't think it was published until fairly recently.
Yes, well, we'll look at that with the publication history. But yeah, it wasn't actually published till 2003. So
Yeah.
and I think to me, it seemed very familiar because it really reminded me of Ambrose Bierce's The Death of Halpin Fraser.
Ah, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, so before we start, I just wanted to remind listeners that, as you know, you can sign up at 3 tiers of membership on our Patreon site to become a patron, but you can also sign up at the first tier and become a patron on Buzzsprout as well now. So please do take a look at that. It helps us to keep the show going, and of course, it helps us spread our tentacles further, not just for Strange Shadows, but also for the Innsmouth Book Club. So, shall we start with our favourite words?
Indeed. Yeah, I only got one from the first story, and it's just because I'd always called it a sabre, but now I know the real word for it. It's yataghan, which is that Ottoman sabre.
Yes, yeah. It's like a sort of a long knife or a short sword.
Yeah.
I'm sure Robert E. Howard used that a few times as well. And I was familiar with this because a couple of years back on a website, a British website that sells swords, I saw a very nice yataghan for sale at a good price, and I paid for it, but the guy had a lot of delivery problems. He ended up he couldn't get them in stock, so I was almost a proud owner of a very nice Damascus steel yataghan. But there we go.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's technically a hewing knife. So, yeah, there you go.
That's probably what I would have done with it, had a good hewing around. The first word I'm going to choose is solicitude, as in self-solicitude, because this was one of those words that I was familiar with, but wasn't quite sure what it meant. And all it really means is concern or worry. So now I know precisely what solicitude means.
Nice. Yeah, I think the next one I'm going to go with is it's another one again that I was sort of familiar with, but now I know exactly what it is ague.
Nice.
In terms of an illness, it refers to malaria or similar affliction that has a fever and causes shaking. So if you're saying they're afflicted with an ague, that's what it means. It's sort of like a disease that gives you fever.
There was one word here that I didn't know, tabourets, which I had to look up, which is a type of cabinet or stool.
Another one I've got is an archaic term, which is anodyne, which is an archaic term for painkiller, which I've heard before, but I just like it.
Speaking of which, words that I knew, but just like the sound of, deliquescence.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one, isn't it?
It's like melting or, rotting away. But I also thought deliquescence Could be a new shop in Innsmouth, couldn't it?
Innsmouth deliquescence.
Get your fresh meats at the deliquescence.
Or not fresh meats.
There might be a Pearl and Scream ad coming up there.
Nice. Yeah, for my final one is another one that I just like the sound of that I've heard before is propinquity.
Yes,
Yeah, which is being close to someone or something, and it's actually a one of the main tenets in social psychology, sort of thing.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's looking at attraction and things like that, and sort of being close to people. Strange.
Interesting.
Mm.
And one final one that I had to look this one up was collops. COLLOPS. Now, again, with our mindset, my immediate thought was, what a load of old collops. It sounds like that kind of term.
Yeah. It does, doesn't it?
It's quite an old term for slices of meat, particularly bacon. I wasn't familiar with that at all. So I wondered, was that an American term, or was it perhaps even like a northern term? It sounds a bit northern to me. I got me collops for tea.
Yeah. They do still use it in butchery, or at least they did when I back in the sort of 90s when I trained in butchery. They still use it. Yeah.
Ah, right.
Yeah, I think it's a butcher's term rather than a sort of everyday term.
Interesting. Yes, we like that. As we did discover on the Innsmouth Book Club just recently, Tim is a qualified butcher.
I am indeed.
Or he trained in butchery. So just be careful. Just be careful. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Just be careful.
And fishmongery, which always comes in handy in Innsmouth.
So let's start with our first story then. The kiss of, how are you pronouncing this? I think you said Zoraida, which is pretty much what I was going to go for.
Yeah, I think I'm just flattening the vowels on it because of my northernness. So it's just okay. Yeah, kiss of Zoraida.
It is an actual name. It's an Arabic name. And apparently Zoraida was a character in Don Quixote, a Moorish woman in Don Quixote, which I didn't know. I haven't read that for years. So I'm sure someone out there will be able to let us know the correct pronunciation.
Yeah. Don't hesitate to pull us up on this because, our pronunciations are terrible. Right. Well, the story was completed on October the 15th, 1930, and was sent to Farnsworth Wright, but not for Weird Tales, for a new magazine called Oriental Stories. And surprise, surprise, it was rejected. But Smith took it away and did some rewrites on it, and it was later accepted. He says in a letter to August Derleth, dated November the 3rd, 1931. However, he did take The Kiss of Zoraida, a short oriental for Oriental Stories. He thought it wasn't distinctively Oriental when I sent it in last year. The insertion of a few these and thous in the dialogue and the omission of one or two ironic touches that were more universal than Eastern seems to have changed his opinion. So there you go.
So we go from not being weird enough or too weird to not being Oriental enough or being too Oriental.
Yeah.
It's definitely a pattern emerging, isn't it?
There is. Smith described it in a letter to HPL as an ungodly piece of pseudo-Oriental junk. So
yeah, I saw that. He wasn't too keen on this one.
No, and he also said in the same letter to Derleth later on that it's not a weird tale at all, but what the French would call a conte cruel. Which, it is, Oriental Stories was renamed The Magic Carpet.
Oh my God.
I know. And The Kiss of Zoraida appeared in the July 1933 issue.
Yes, and conte cruel was a term, I think it was started in the 19th century. I can't remember the name. There was a collection of stories, I think, under that title. I can't remember the name of the person who gathered them together or who wrote them. But they're basically non-supernatural stories with a cruel or ironic twist.
Yeah.
And this is a rare Smith story with nothing of the supernatural or the sort of fantasy setting or sci-fi setting about it.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? It's very sort of very much not like a lot of his stuff, but it's more like a lot of his poetry, I guess, because some of his poetry went down that sort of Cruel sort of style.
And I mean, it certainly has that Smithian ironic twist, doesn't it? The sting in the tail, and the subject matter is very Smithian. In fact, both the stories we're covering today have the same subject matter, which is affairs gone wrong.
Pretty much. Affairs gone wrong with a little hint of necrophilia. Yeah.
So, as we heard at the top of the show there, we are in the Bowery suburbs of Damascus, which of course is the capital of Syria and is the oldest capital in the world. So a very old city. And I guess here we're harkening back to those Arabian Nights stories, aren't we, which were very influential on that whole generation of authors.
Yeah, especially like Lovecraft said several times that they were a big influence on him, haven't they?
And from what we understand, we've got this young man, Selim, who's out for a secret assignation with Zoraida, the young wife of Abdur Ali. While her lord and master, as it says, has been away, she had met him among the lilacs. And I did like this, till he had grown to associate the very odour of her hair and the savour of her lips with their fragrance. That's a nice image.
It is, yeah. It's again, it's that poet mindset, isn't it, of Smith's? It's associating people with scents and colours and all that kind of stuff. It's the very sort of poetic style.
And we're back with Smith's. Was it a favourite thing of his to be describing sort of plants and flowers?
Yeah.
And botany. He does it so well. He must have really enjoyed writing those descriptions. I
wonder if it's because of where he lived. Because Auburn in the hills, there's going to be a lot of flora and fauna, isn't there? So I guess nature may be one of his things.
Yeah, well, he was certainly out and about in it quite a lot, as he often writes to Lovecraft. They've gone walking or trekking.
Yeah.
Or even spent a few days up in the mountains with Mrs. Sully.
Under the stars, by a roaring fire. Yeah.
Like roaring fire, yeah. But all is not well in this perfumed garden. I think it's a case of the hunt is better than the catch, isn't it? As someone once sang. I think it might have been Lemmy.
That great poet, Lemmy Kilminster.
Oh, I won't have a word said against him.
Oh, no, absolute hero.
Because we read, in fact, it was all too easy, and Selim was beginning to weary a little of this heavy-scented happiness and the oversweet affection of Zoraida. So basically, he's getting bored.
Yeah. Sounds like he's been playing the field as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
There were other women no less fair than the jeweller's wife, whom he had not kissed so often, or had not kissed at all. So, yeah, he's obviously thinking of going a wandering again.
He's got a roving eye, as the expression goes.
A roving eye.
Yeah. Which sounds like quite a good sort of D&D monster.
Roving eye.
Isn't it? Oh, no, it's a roving eye.
Yeah. Like those Guardian things with the cyclopean eye, them bloody things. Don't know if you had the phrase down south, but I remember like my gran saying it was a northern phrase, they don't charge for window shopping.
Anyway, despite this, and he thinks this might be the last time he'll come and visit her, possibly.
Yeah.
He goes ahead through the flower-burdened bushes, and there's a figure standing in the shadow near the fountain. The figure was dim and darkly muffled, but it must be Zoraida. She had never failed to meet him there. And we know that her husband is away on business at the moment, supposedly. But as he approaches, he wonders why she did not rush to meet him, as was her wont. And he calls softly, Zoraida. And a figure emerges from the shadow, and it's not Zoraida, but her husband, Abdur Ali. And her husband is pointing a pistol at him.
See, this reminds me of those Whitehall farces, like "Don't just lie there, say something," or that something. if it was one of them, crikey, it's Abdul Ali, and the music would kick in and they go chasing through the bushes, sort of thing.
It is, in a sense, it could be a setup for classic farce, couldn't it? The husband has come home early from his business meeting or whatever. Yeah.
You'd have to hide under the bed and
in the cupboard with your trousers off and all that kind of stuff. Then the vicar's going to turn up.
The vicar will turn up.
Yeah. But this takes a somewhat darker turn.
Indeed.
So initially, Selim thinks that, well, Abdur has just returned early from Aleppo. But as it later transpires, Abdur has known about this affair all along and he's kind of set this evening up to take his vengeance on his cuckold. Is he the cuckold or is it the person?
No, he's the cuckold. Yeah.
He's the cuckold, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
And apparently the female opposite is cook queen.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
there you go. Yeah.
And not only does Ali have a pistol on him, the young man realised uncomfortably that he himself was unarmed except for his yataghan, which, to be honest, I wouldn't be too uncomfortable about being only armed with a yataghan because it's quite a fearsome weapon against a pistol. I guess that's a different thing. But then, of course, we get the two eunuchs, Qasim and Mustafa, who also step forward with drawn scimitars, and these are big lads.
Yeah, big bruisers, these chaps, aren't they?
And one stands at his right and one stands at his left, so he's not going anywhere.
Yeah. It's that whole like nightclub thing, isn't it? Where bouncers, if somebody's being a pain, you'll get a bouncer sandwich. You know, you get one on either side, and then they get you under the armpits, and just lift you off the floor and take you out the door.
What we used to call a carry out.
Yeah, the carry out. Yeah. It's a Glaswegian speciality, apparently. That the whole hands under the armpits and lift. Yeah.
And off you go.
Yeah.
And Abdur Ali says, well, you're privileged tonight because I'm going to allow you to be admitted to my harem. And I like this. This privilege, I believe you have arrogated to yourself on certain former occasions and without my knowledge. Tonight I shall grant it myself, though I doubt if there are many who would follow my example. Come, Zoraida is waiting for you, and you must not disappoint her.
Yeah. It's just ominous, isn't it? You can see where this is going already, can't you? Yeah. So the two big chaps are either side of him, pistols in his spine, and he's basically led off. Yeah.
And Zoraida is certainly there, wearing the scanty harem costume of bright silks, in which she was wont to receive her lover. She's lying on the divan, very still, and seems to be asleep, though her face was whiter than usual, with a touch of bitterness around the mouth. That's a nice little touch because obviously that
isn't it?
There's a double meaning there with the bitterness, isn't there, as we find out later on.
Indeed, yeah. And it also brings in, the sort of post-mortem thing of people who've been poisoned. They have that specific colour, that it's almost like a sort of bee sting almost sort of colour, don't they, around the lips. With certain types of poison like strychnine, arsenic, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yes. And Salim says, well, what have you done to her? And Abdur Ali, well, he thinks he's been very considerate. Because, I've dealt with her very gently, all things considered. As thou seest, I have not marred in any wise the perfection of her beauty. There is no wound, and not even the mark of a blow on her white body. I did not play the butcher, there we go, and slay her with the sword. So instead, he poisoned her.
Yeah. What a nice chap. Charming.
Yeah, charming, eh? I'm not that bad. I poisoned her. I didn't hack her to pieces. Well, great, thanks,
It's a rare and precious poison which slays immediately and with little pain. A drop of it would have been enough, or even so much as still remains upon her lips. She drank it of her own choice. I was merciful to her, as I shall be to thee.
Yes, we're going to find out what form that mercy takes as well, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any guesses as to what poison that might be? I mean, I suppose it could be any number of things. We don't really get a sense of what time this is, what time period.
No.
He mentions the pistol as like a silver fretting on it. So I'm thinking sort of maybe 19th century, that kind of almost, I'm thinking like those old highwayman pistol type things.
Yeah, your flintlock type job.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, the poisons to like instantly, the ones that spring to mind are obviously cyanide, but there are also some of the poisons that you get off off frogs and things like that, which are a contact poison.
Oh right.
Yeah, so I would say something like that, either sort of batracha toxin off the old frogs, or cyanide. Yeah,
there's a nice word.
Indeed. Tell I've been doing research, can't you?
Just remember to clear your browser history.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's an author thing, right? And a lot of friends say this. If people could see the sites you were doing for research, they call the police.
Oh, I know. It's like here's my bookmarks when I've been doing like certain stories, and I was clearing it a while ago, and it went from everything from like Victorian plumbing to post-mortem lividity.
Well, there's two band names straight away.
Oh yeah.
I'm quite lucky. When I did, I released a crime thriller last year, and I called on my wife's expertise, especially when it came to police procedures and also forensics and that kind of stuff as well, particularly as it relates to bodies.
Indeed, yeah.
Now the couple that stay together.
Oh God, the Fred and Rose west of Bedfordshire.
And I like this because this guy's a jewel dealer, right? But yeah, he seems to have some decent knowledge of poisons, and he seems to have an inclination towards that kind of thing. And Salim is in no position to deny anything. And he says, of course, it would be useless to deny anything. The jewel dealer's face became a mask of malignity. I like that of some avenging fiend. You need not confess, I know everything. I knew it even from the first. My trip to Aleppo was only a blind so that I could make sure. I was here in Damascus watching when you thought me leagues away. So he has been set up. And this is where we get his version of mercy.
Yeah.
Because he gives him two options, doesn't he, really?
Yeah, indeed he does. Basically, the first one is take the poison, kiss Zoraida's lips and take the poison. And the other one is, unless thou dost my bidding, thy hands will be sliced off at the wrists to begin with. The next blows will sever a small portion of each forearm. Then a little temporary attention will be given to other parts of your body, which I thought was a touch, before returning to the arms, and I leave the rest to your conjecture. I'm sure thou wilt prefer the other death, which will be quick and almost painless, apart from its other advantages.
Yes, it's a long, slow, lingering sort of death of 1,000 cuts in a way, isn't it? That starts with the extremities and works in.
Pretty much.
I can imagine that's something they're going to take their time over. And isn't it a nice? Well, there's your ironic twist that the kiss or the kisses that he came seeking, and more besides, are now going to be the instrument of his demise.
Yeah, they don't really give him much time to think either. It's basically stooped above the couch where she lay, terrified, terror of death, all that kind of business. And make haste, the voice of Abdur Ali was steely as the lifted scimitars.
And then we get this: Selim stooped above the couch where Zoraida lay. Terror, the abject terror of death, was his one emotion. He had wholly forgotten his love for Zoraida, had forgotten her kisses and endearments. He feared the strange pale woman before him as much as he had once desired her. So that's this very Smithian thing, isn't it, of love and death and sex and terror being two sides of the same coin, and it doesn't take much to flip it round. Well, I say it doesn't take much. I mean, your impending death, I suppose, is the reason.
Two walking great eunuchs with scimitars might have something to do with it.
And that takes us to the end of the story.
Indeed.
Selim bent over and kissed Zoraida on the mouth. Her lips were not entirely cold, but there was a queer bitter taste. Of course, it must be the poison. And we get a description of the searing agony that runs through his veins. Blinding flames appeared before him and filled the room like ever-widening suns. And he did not know that he had fallen forward on the couch across her body. So we get almost this embrace at the end as well.
Yeah.
Again, a sort of what they would have been doing, but in a very different way.
Yeah.
I like this flames thing and all. What do you think about that? It's like he sees the room as being full of flames, though they then begin to shrink with an awful swiftness. That almost had me in mind as is he going to some sort of hell or some sort of damnation or something, but they fade away.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, that sort of room filling with flames, yeah, you're right. It's that sort of hell and damnation, brimstone, all that kind of business. But the fact that they receded
is that the idea of the afterlife again? If we look at the Lovecraftian view, which I think Smith shared to some extent, of it's just nothing.
Yeah.
You're totally gone. Nothing survives in this, whether it be a paradise or an inferno. There's nothing survives of the individual at all, because he says at the end, then at once he was alone and was losing even the sense of solitude, till there was nothing anywhere but darkness and oblivion.
Yeah, maybe that thing, the flames and everything, because it's been said that, you know, people when they're dying and they see this white light and all that kind of business, that it's just misfiring neurons in your hippocampus, right? It's just your brain and your subconscious trying to make sense of it. So maybe, you know, if he was a religious man, this sort of coming oblivion, his brain was sort of maybe interpreting it as the hell that he deserves to go to because he's an adulterer, maybe. Yeah. And then it's just gone.
Yeah. And we've had that fire running through his veins as well. It's like again, perhaps the brain thinking, why am I hot? Oh, the brain almost invents these flames to explain why the body is so hot internally. Yeah, perhaps.
I think I've mentioned before. It's like the subconscious mind is a very strange thing. And so I remember once a nightmare, one of the worst nightmares I've ever had. A dog clamped its teeth into my calf, right, like taking a chunk out of my calf, and I woke up because I had cramp. That pain, that's how my brain, my sleeping mind interpreted the pain, was a dog sinking its teeth into my leg.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost like, well, as we see in a lot of these stories, the brain has to rationalize what is going on in some way, although that's almost the other way around, isn't it? Because your brain could just say, Tim, we've got cramp. Instead, it creates this vision. Yeah, humans are weird. We're very weird things.
Yeah. I mean, after that, I'd actually read a book on like interpretation of dreams, and it was sort of 90% cobblers. But it's interesting that the sort of things that, you know, that the brain cooks up to try and rationalize external stimuli, when it should just say, dude, you've got cramp. You know?
Yeah, there's someone knocking on your front door or something. It's not a
somebody's knocking on your front door. It's not a
dwarf with a hammer tapping on a something, mining mithril or something.
Yeah, exactly. This is it.
Perhaps it's just our brains. I don't know.
Oh, maybe.
Perhaps listeners could let us know, because of course we're in pure Lovecraft territory here as well, with nightmares, and you know, it can be overstated a bit, but Lovecraft certainly drew on some nightmares, some aspects of his work.
Yeah,
and that's something he and Smith talk about in their letters as well quite often.
Yeah, well, I've written several stories that have been inspired by the weird ass crap that happens in my brain when I'm asleep. So.
The whole anthology Corridors was very much inspired by an extremely vivid dream I had of yellow corridors that I wrote down as soon as I woke up.
Nice.
So yeah, I can still picture it. It's really strange, isn't it?
You obviously went to the back rooms, the yellow corridors.
I know, when I saw that, and I'd not seen that until that point. Yeah, but when I saw it after, I thought, wow, that's perhaps we shared the same dream there or something. I don't know. So yeah, let us know, listener, your favourite dream, or I don't know if favourite is the word, your most terrifying dream, and we can do a bit of amateur psychoanalysis on you if you like.
You're a nutcase. There you go.
Less cheese.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it for the Kiss of Zoraida. Very short story, and I mean it's enjoyable enough if you don't mind people being murdered.
Yeah. It's strange because it's not the sort of story that I would read, because, you know, it's just not my cup of tea. But it's, like you say, it's enjoyable enough and it's really well written, which is just Smith all over, isn't it? Even these lesser stories are better than a lot of people's best. Yeah.
Okay, so the second story is The Face by the River. And how did this one fare in publication?
Well, it really didn't. It was written in a single day on October the 29th, 1930, and he never submitted it anywhere. It basically just sat in a drawer. It was published in the first issue of a scholarly journal, Lost Worlds, the Journal of Clark Ashton Smith's Studies, in 2003. Basically, Mrs. Sully had the the manuscript, and that's basically it. There was,
Right.
no submissions, no rejections. It just sat in a drawer.
Yeah, yeah. I can't have read this before then, because I would have known if I'd have read something of that. If unless it was published in an anthology or something somewhere, I can't see that I would have read it. Yeah, I don't know. It felt very familiar to me. That's strange.
Yeah. I think, like, to me, it did feel very familiar, but because I've recently read a lot of Ambrose Bierce, and the setup and the moonlight stroll down the road, and it's in the same sort of geographical location, so a lot of the descriptors are the same. And we know that Smith was a fan of Bierce, so
Yes,
it reminds me specifically the death of Halpin Fraser.
There is also a real life incident that we'll speak about at the end that may have been an influence on this. Actually happened in the same river, but we'll get through the story first. Then I'll read that out at the end, and people can judge for themselves. Now this one does have we don't know if it's a supernatural element, certainly a psychological element. Certainly a man is being haunted. Whether that's an actual ghost or whether that's his conscience, then that's for the reader to decide.
I think that's why I'm also getting Bierce parallels, because a lot of Bierce's stories are that kind of thing. It's more of a psychological haunting than a spiritual one, if that makes sense.
And our protagonist is named Edgar Silen, Sylen, which is an unusual name. And I always like to look these names up just to see if Smith is drawing on anything. The only thing I can really find with this is that it's a place in Wales. So I can't think of any Welsh connection. I thought, are we going sort of Arthur Machen here, that sort of territory, but not really.
No. I think I've driven through Silen.
Oh.
Yeah. There's a tiny little village, if I'm thinking of the right place.
Yeah, I think it's in Carmarthenshire or somewhere like that, I think.
Yeah, sounds about right. It's a tiny little place, like 2 farms and a post office kind of thing.
And Edgar has begun to develop an aversion for rivers and a dread of women's faces. And you get a sense early on that this is all down to a guilty conscience. It had never occurred to him before that so many rivers resembled the Sacramento, nor had he imagined that anything sinister could attach itself to the leaning willows and alders along their banks. So a couple of times we get mentions of the willows, which obviously triggers memories of Blackwood. Yeah.
Blackwood, yeah.
And as well as everywhere he goes, he seems to see, whenever he sees a river, it puts him in mind of the Sacramento and this particular scene. But more than that, he saw resemblances to the dead woman everywhere in the girls that he passed on the streets of unfamiliar towns and cities. And I like that this is in cold. We've got no mention of this woman before this, but just this, he saw resemblances to the dead woman. So we've got a river and we've got a dead woman, and it's quite easy to put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, we get a lovely description of the dead woman just below this, which it has some real nice touches in this description, I find. He found that her short oval face with its pallor untouched by rouge, her high, faintly penciled brows above eyes of deep violet grey, her full, petulant mouth, or her slender but well-curved figure were seemingly to be met on every pavement, every train, streetcar, shop, restaurant, and hotel. Now that description, it is almost ghostly, isn't it? The sort of the pale pallor and the violets and the greys, and it also almost brings to mind the classic Grey Lady, doesn't it? Yeah.
And I think again, this is Smith, his skill at drawing, whether it's a world or a scene or a person, of drawing a very vivid description in one sentence. There's none of that usual. She was 5'2", and it's more about. It's almost impressionistic, isn't it, rather than literally descriptive? Which I think is what lends it that power. But I was also put in mind of those. What were those old paintings from the 70s of the lady that was supposedly houses caught fire or something?
Oh, yeah.
It was a very famous painting that you probably bought in Argos in the 70s or something.
And every house it went in caught fire.
Yeah.
Oh God, I've read about that not that long ago, and I can't remember for the life
I
of
shall
me.
see if I can find some links to that, because that's bound to be out there on the internet still.
Mm.
That one, they were quite cheap, tacky paintings in a particular style. But yeah, it kind of put me in mind from that. It's like a childhood memory, perhaps.
Yeah, it just reminded me that pretty much for listeners across the pond or elsewhere, pretty much every town and city in the United Kingdom has a grey lady. Seriously, everywhere you go
Yeah.
has a grey lady, and they usually walk round the theatre or towards the theatre or through the churchyard,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, it's a very common haunting, isn't it? Along with monks, I suppose, probably.
The monks, yeah.
And it's actually one of my favourite episodes of the old sitcom Rising Damp was the Grey Lady, which was
I'd forgotten about that.
very funny, very funny. But well, again, it's not ghostly as such, but it's more like you must have done that before. You see someone and you think, oh, it's my wife. Oh no, that's not. But this is happening far more frequently than just someone who looks a bit like your wife or whoever.
It brings to mind those horror films and things like that. You've always got them types of horror movies where somebody's haunted by a certain woman. And they look at often the sort of J horror, things like The Ring and The Grudge.
Yeah.
It's the girl with the long straight black hair, and everywhere the protagonist goes, he sees her in the crowd, or he catches her out the corner of his eye out the bus window. Well, it reminds me of that.
What's the famous film set in Venice with Donald Sutherland? It Don't Look Now?
Don't Look Now.
With a little girl in red, isn't it?
The red, It turns out to be a murderous dwolf, yeah.
Of course it is. What else would it be?
That was a brilliant film. I remember I watched that when I was a kid. And that final scene. See that, modern filmmakers need to take note. That's how you do a jump scare. You don't do anything throughout the entire film, and you build to that one scene.
It's much more memorable, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah.
That's much more impact. But we do learn this woman's name, Elise, and she had been his stenographer. The propinquity of business association had drawn them into a more intimate relationship, and he had loved her for a while till she became too exacting, too exorbitant in her demands. So this mirrors the previous story where having initiated this affair or started this affair is now thinking, I'm getting a bit bored with this now.
Yeah.
But in this case, Elise threatens to expose the affair to his wife, which turns out to be a mistake. I just wanted to mention the name Elise as well, because it's fairly unusual.
Yeah.
But I think most people will be familiar with it, certainly if you've ever had piano lessons with Beethoven and Für Elise, which is probably one of the most famous pieces of music. We could sidetrack. There's a whole interesting area in itself of study of who Elise was, because it's a little bit like the Mona Lisa. It's the Mona Lisa of the music world. Could have been several people. And there's even a theory put forward that someone mistranscribed it, and it should be for Therese or Teresa. So that could even be the wrong name. But that's a big digression. But if people want to look at that, it's very interesting.
It's interesting. Yeah. The other people who will have heard of it are fans of The Cure, because one of The Cure's sort of standout tracks is they always do live is Letters to Elise. So there you go. It was Robert Smith's wife at the time.
All right. So she reveals this information as they're taking a twilight walk by the river, the Sacramento River, which incidentally runs through California. It's the largest river in California, and Smith would have been very familiar with this, as he liked to walk through the Sierra Nevadas and all that kind of stuff in his mountain walks. So this was something, again, this is part of his Auburn cycle of stories.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, Elise tells him this or threatens him this, and he goes into this sudden rage and basically chokes her, and he either pushes her or she stumbles and falls into the river.
All he could see at that moment was her frightened face, her throat with the visible marks of his fingers, white as an apparition in the dusk and appallingly distinct in every detail. Yeah. And he'd forgotten that they were so close to the river's edge, had forgotten that the water was very deep below the bank of that particular place. And then he only remembered when he heard the splash of her fall. So yeah, it's definitely one of those red mist murders, isn't it? It's not premeditated. He's not put any thought into it whatsoever. It was just a moment of panic, I guess, of like being exposed.
And this panic continues, right? Because instantly he decides to flee. Again, there's no, like I say, he's not planned this at all or prepared for it. His flight from California was vague to him also. And his first clear memory was that of a newspaper he had seen the next morning in a neighbouring state with pictures of Elise and himself above a lurid conjectural description of the crime. So she must have been found by someone.
Yeah.
And obviously the police are now looking for him. So yeah, having done this in a sort of blind fit of rage, he almost flees just as blindly.
Yeah.
And this basically changes his whole life because now he's lost his family, he's lost his wife, he's lost his kids, he's lost his flourishing business, the respectable place he had won in his community, all lost beyond recovery through something which, as he soon persuaded himself, was no more than a fatal accident. Well, if you count strangulation as an accident, I suppose.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? He carries on here. The idea of himself as a fugitive from justice, as a vulgar murderer in the eyes of the world, was alien and confusing to the last degree. Yeah, I like this, though, that he retained enough wit, however, to disguise himself with a touch of subtlety and to double upon his trail in a manner that baffled the police. He bought second-hand clothing of the type that would be worn by a labouring man, disposed of his neat tailor-made suit by leaving it at night beneath a pile of old lumber. He allowed his beard to grow and purchased a pair of heavy-rimmed spectacles. Now, this brought to mind like the Pink Panther, or something like that. Those old movies, putting on a pair of specs was a good disguise.
It's your whole Superman Batman thing, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Get rid of your curly Q and take your specs off. Yeah.
And I thought this was kind of weird as well, or odd. He allowed his beard to grow and purchased a pair of heavy-rimmed specs, which he had. These simple measures transformed him from a well-to-do realtor to a socialistic carpenter out of work. I'm a bit confused by the socialistic aspect of that. Are carpenters known to be socialists or socialists at the time? I'm not really sure. Or is it just that that's the total opposite of the conservative real estate guy is the socialist carpenter?
Yeah,
the beard.
That's a very good point. Maybe it's just the beard, because at the time, at that sort of time, you sort of your beatniks and your all that kind of stuff. It was all beards, wasn't it? Maybe that.
Yeah, unless you're in the Navy, a beard was probably fairly unusual, I guess, wasn't it? Or an artist.
Yeah, it was all clean-shaven chaps back then, wasn't it?
Yeah. But he goes even further than that. He acquires a rough and fierce air that was quite compatible with the role of a discontented workman. So, in English terms, he'd be dropping his H's now and saying "Gore blimey."
Yeah, exactly.
He's an East End chippy.
Yeah. Oh.
Nah, mate. No, I can't. No, it's going to be. Oh, got to rip all that out. See,
it'll cost you. It'll cost you.
But he's well supplied with money. So, I guess did he have a big roll of cash on him or something at the time? Or could you in those days have gone to the bank and withdrawn something?
Yeah.
I guess it wouldn't be under the same sort of scrutiny as it is now, is it?
I don't know. I've no idea how the banking system of the 1930s worked, to be honest. I've no idea how the banking system of 2023 works, to be honest. It's a complete bloody mystery.
Largely it doesn't. Well, it doesn't work for our benefit. Let's put it
exactly.
Like that. Oh, sorry, it's getting a bit socialistic. I'm not a carpenter. I do have a sort of beard. And more, again, we can speculate this is his conscience weighing upon him. Because I think deep down, given this guy's background and everything else, he knows this is wrong. Although he's trying to cover it up, it was an accident, etc. It was probably her fault, Deep down, he knows it's wrong.
Yeah.
So more and more, he starts seeing willow-bordered rivers, and more he starts seeing women who resembled Elise.
The mere sight of a stream or a girl with the fancied likeness, even in one feature or detail of costume, would send him towards the nearest railroad station. So he's becoming a nervous wreck by this point, isn't he? It's really sort of taken its toll on his sanity. He's failed his SAN role, hasn't he?
Yeah, because he's even getting this sense of an unknown presence as well. This is not just a visual thing. He's getting this actual feeling that someone is following him or watching him as well. And he's very concerned. He seems more concerned about he might be going insane than having killed someone.
Yes.
That seems to be his major concern. Well, the whole thing seems to be his major concern. He's lost his station in life and now he's possibly going mad. And you sort of think, yeah, but it was because of your own actions.
Yeah. But
this wasn't something that was forced upon you.
Yeah, again, it's that sort of rationalization, isn't it? That his brain is trying to rationalize it by blaming other people. I mean, you see that everywhere, don't you? I mean, you see it all the time with people. It wasn't my fault. It's just, It wasn't my fault. It was because of this, that, and the other. That's why I walked in at the bank with a shotgun. It's never their fault, is it?
Well, without getting too political, we've got a prime example with the next prime minister at the moment, right?
Well, that's exactly why I was thinking what I was thinking of at the time.
The big boys did it and ran away.
Yeah. Honest, they just ran up and put a beer in one hand and a sandwich in the other, and then ran away. Yeah, right, mate.
And he thinks, right, I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to master this. I'm going to go for a twilight walk along the riverbank just to, prove that this is just a passing thing. I can get control of this. And of course it doesn't, because what he gets now is, rather than just seeing other women who look like Elise, he gets this, it's like a pale luminosity. I like this. He could even see it when he lay awake in the darkness, as if it were possessed of a pale luminosity, a small blurred image somewhat to one side in his field or vision, an image that he could not seize or define.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this face is constantly in his vision, but he can't quite catch a full glimpse of it.
Yeah. Some of this reminds me of, brings to mind images from the film Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, yes.
It's similar, isn't it? That blurred, indistinct images that are there and maybe not there, but maybe they are, this sort of thing.
Yeah. So he even starts researching on sort of mental illness. He goes to a public library with the idea of consulting various medical volumes on brain pathology. But even as he's reading the book, the letters begin to blur and fade, and the face appears again. So he can't even focus on a book.
He also first thinks that it may be the glasses. That it's these milk bottle bottoms that he's put on to disguise himself is giving him eye strain. But again, that's a fallacy.
That's the rationalization again, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
So from there, of course, he turns to drink and drugs.
Yeah. Well, it's been creeping close to the center of his vision, hasn't it? Slowly over time, from the corner of his eye to the center, which is really, really kind of disturbing thought, isn't it? I've often thought, them floaters you get in your eyes.
Yeah.
It's almost like that, but one that won't go away and starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. It was an incredibly disturbing thought.
And it's got characteristics of something. It's not obviously if you've got a sty in your eye or something.
Yeah, a bit of grit.
Yeah, but this is actually taking the shape of a face gradually.
Yeah.
For a while he drank soddenly. He sought the anodyne of drugs, but without losing the spectre, even in the ultimate delirium of his intoxication. Then his mind succumbed to a fear that was utterly beyond reason, and he dwelt henceward in a hell of phantasmal and superstitious terrors. The thing was no longer a mere hallucination. It had come back from the cryptic realms of the dead. So now he's accepted the fact that this is a full-blown supernatural haunting. And he fails his next SAN roll.
Yes, he really does.
With the realization of this, doesn't he? Now, it is almost cataleptic, because whatever he does, wherever he goes, this face is now right in front of him all the time.
That would be really... If you think about that for a minute, you just can't get somebody's face out of your vision. Yeah, that really would drive you around the bend, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And from there, you get the sense that he just becomes like a wanderer. He's just sort of wandering around from city to city, slowly sinking. Again, I don't know where he's getting his money from, but you can almost imagine him now. He's sleeping rough on the streets kind of thing. He can't engage with normal society anymore.
Yeah.
And this was the really creepy bit as well, because apart from seeing that face everywhere, he slept very little, and when he did sleep, Elise hovered above him in the vistas of his dreams. It was mostly at night, lying awake, that he became aware of the abyss that lay behind and beneath her face, an abyss in which he could see the slow sinking of dim macabre forms, of corpse-like or skeleton-like things that appeared always to fall and decompose in unfathomable gloom, but the face itself never sank into the abyss. So this is kind of like he's seeing death, but then he's seeing beyond death as well.
Yeah, beyond the veil sort of thing. Yeah. It's a lovely passage. That I love that passage. And again, it just brings like vision of that, again, you see it in films when people are going down to hell. You've got that sort of tunnel and there's people sticking out the walls, like arms reaching out to grab them, sort of thing, as they tumble on towards damnation.
And of course, he ends up, as we might expect, he suddenly finds himself in the dusk, beneath the unheeded willows, beside the unrecognized flowing of the Sacramento, and the face drew nearer still. The phantom throat was within arm's length for the first time. And he sort of repeats what he did before, really. He clutches for the throat. Now it's in reach. I suppose perhaps he thinks he can destroy this thing again or whatever. But of course, in doing that, he falls and he goes into the river.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that same idea again, because as he sinks beneath the water, it seemed to swim on a fathomless abyss where human bones and cadavers were slowly drowning in a darkness that was like the deliquescence of the world. So now he's being actively drawn in to that place.
Yeah, and it's just a lovely line to end it, really. The face was very close to him as he went down, and then it began to recede in a lessening perspective. And then, suddenly, he saw it no longer. Lovely, lovely. Yeah.
Yes, that's the end, truly the end.
Yeah. It's interesting because both those stories ended in very similar fashion of the person's consciousness being completely extinguished, nothing but the void.
Yeah, from like a first person perspective as well, isn't it? We don't get the description of someone sees the guy fall in the river or someone sees the guy die from the poison. It's the first person perspective, which is interesting. Yeah. So I suppose in some ways that's someone murders someone and gets haunted by them is a fairly standard ghosty type plot. Certainly you can imagine an M.R. James.
Beers. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of similar things.
Yeah.
But there is also this other possibility I mentioned earlier that might have given some influence on this story. So this is on the Sacramento River, and this is the report. I think it's from a local newspaper. It was the morning of April 21st, 1911, when a few campers along the riverbank west of Chico noticed a wagon alongside the shore. They also found a letter nearby addressed to a Mr. O.M. Baker of Colusa. Studying the scene, the campers spotted something that might have made their hearts skip. A blood-stained axe, a club clotted with blood, a pile of ashes in the centre of which were charred human bones and a metal clasp, is how the Colusa Daily Sun described it. The campers searched the premises further and found other evidences that a crime had been committed. A flour sack saturated with blood was also found, and adhering to the sack were several short human hairs of a light brown colour. The bed of the wagon was covered with blood, and the wheels, rear axle and sides were also bespattered with blood. The owner of the wagon was not to be found, nor were the horses. Law enforcement officers determined that Baker was not the victim. The remains in fact belonged to a woman. The officers believed that after the lady was mutilated, the killer had shoved what was left of her over the crest of a levee, sliding the ghoulish mess down the embankment. Police launched a broad search for clues in a suspect, though nothing came of it. This failure clearly frustrated the journalists in Colusa, because they wrote, "The murder is one of the most mysterious that has confronted the police of Northern California, as the officers have only the slightest of clues to work on," the Sun observed. "It is evident that the crime was carried out with deliberation and cunning. and that the plans were well laid. It is held by the officers that the killing was done away from the river and that the fiend drove to the stream to get rid of the corpse. So there's some interesting parallels there.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that case at all. But did it remain unsolved?
Yes, yeah. I've not been able to find anything else about it. I've done a bit of a search for Baker and Sacramento and that year, but I've not been able to find anything else. So it's not even told who the victim was. Was the victim even ever identified?
No, it's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, perhaps we can speculate, maybe, given there was a letter there, the guy went off and committed suicide, possibly. It could be one of those things.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't really, it seemed, well, although it was a letter addressed to him, that seems a little bit odd to leave that kind of evidence around, doesn't it?
Maybe, well, maybe it was somebody trying to put the blame on him.
Yeah.
You know?
So, yeah, although this one they did say was deliberate and calculated, which the one, well, we say the one in the story wasn't, but maybe on a subconscious level it was.
Yeah, well, he did take her on a twilight walk to a sort of a lonely stretch of the river, you know.
Yes, and we are getting everything from his point of view as well, aren't we? So, you know.
Yeah, it could be the classic unreliable narrator going on. Yeah.
So yeah, again, it's another quite grim story in a lot of ways, but very well done, very well told, and some lovely descriptions in there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I find it strange that he never bothered to do anything with it because, I mean, like I say, it is very Biercean, to coin a term. It's very similar to a lot of his stuff, especially the was it the Haunted Houses anthology or one of the anthologies that he did? They're all that kind of story, and it does remind me of that kind of style. But again, I guess a lot of that is to do with the location, because a lot of Bierce's stuff was in the Napa Valley. So it's all California, isn't it? It's all
very, very similar kind of
area.
setting. Yeah. So we don't have too much in the letters about these stories. You've already quoted Smith as saying, or what he said about the Kiss of Zoraida, which he wrote to Lovecraft.
Pseudo-Oriental.
Yeah. Well, it's that pseudo-Oriental thing I just wanted to pick up on, because there's often this issue when we get into the Arabian Nights and this type of story of that idea of Oriental exoticism. You know, it can be quite a sort of trope or a cliche. And it was interesting to see Lovecraft's thoughts on this, because obviously he's a big fan of the Arabian Nights. But we get this. There's just a couple of little passages in letters. This is from October the 29th, from the monolith of the Shoggoths in the Vale of Planath. Lovely spot. Don't know if you've ever been there.
Not recently.
I'll say, if you had, you didn't send me a postcard.
This is brilliant.
I hope Wright will take Zoraida. Oriental doesn't look like much of a market for me. I never seem to get captivated by the conventional, in inverted commas, spell of the East. To my mind, the Orient is so remote that its happenings lack the sense of substance needed to produce an impression of reality. Only when it is sublimed into a sort of fantastic and ethereal pseudo-Orient does it pack any real kick for me. And even then, it only seems a good second to the still less real Dunsanian regions beyond the East and over the edge of the world. The one possible exception is the Arabian Nights tradition. I was utterly fascinated by Andrew Lang's version of Arabian Nights when I was 5 years old, and never failed to experience a sort of retrospective thrill when confronted again with the old Baghdad scene. So for Lovecraft, it was, in a sense, the Oriental was that remote from him that he struggled to think of it as a real place. Even it's a sort of sense I'm getting from that.
Well, that's interesting, because that brings to mind what August Derleth said to Ramsey Campbell, isn't it? It's the fact that he'd never been to New England, so how could he expect to write it with any reality? That's why he told Campbell to go off and rewrite all the stories that became Inhabitant of the Lake in somewhere he knew. So he went off and created the Brichester and the Severn Valley, which, yeah, is the best advice ever, really, isn't it? Because again, like what Lovecraft said, if he can't picture it, how can he write it?
Yeah, and it's that strange idea again that or perhaps not so strange, that your weird fiction needs to be rooted in reality in order to make it weird. If you said it in a country where there's dragons and three-headed trolls and whatever, then, you see something else, it's not that weird. If you see a three-headed troll in Bedford, then, my word, that's a bit weird. Maybe not on a Friday night, whatever, but, it is that sort of thing. The more rooted in reality it is, then the more jarring the weirdness is.
Saturday night, yeah. That's right. Yeah, I'm sure I've seen a few of them at kicking out time. Yeah.
And then we get a little bit later on. This is the 7th of November 1930, and here's another one. I've got to try and pronounce this. Ninth vacuum of negative matter in the black nebula of beyond the third cluster of space-time continua. Not continuum, continua.
Nice.
Too bad Wright returned Zoraida, but that's exactly like him. For one almost wholly devoid of natural critical intelligence, he has the most amusing set of pedantic distinctions which he drags out now and then. Quote, not oriental enough. That's what he said of Belknaps, which he recently rejected. Yet as a matter of fact, I'd wager that half the stuff he prints is basically false to the various types of Asian psychology as anything he's ever rejected. His Orient, I judge, is merely the conventional pseudo-Orient of cheap English fiction. So I think, to be fair to HPL there, he is calling that out, that sort of exoticism.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, to saying, well, look, if you don't know about it, how can you judge it? I thought it was interesting.
That is very interesting. Yeah. It brings to mind, like, because you had a lot of it around that era, didn't you? Or the Orient stories, but you also had a lot set in Africa. And
yes,
they're obviously written by by people who have no idea about Africa,
Yeah, totally. See, I just read a book recently by an American author. I think I might have mentioned it to you the other day. And it's perfectly well written. I enjoyed it. But there's one scene where they get into, it's Victorian England. They get into a sort of coach and horses or a cab.
A hansom. Yeah.
In London, and a couple of hours later they're in Norwich.
Yeah, good luck.
I live 50 miles north of London, and it takes me almost 2 hours to drive to Norwich in a car. So there's that sort of thing. To me, that's just a failure of research. I'd have done my research a bit more on that.
Oh yeah.
But that's not that's not creating stereotypes of Englishness as such. But a lot of those stories set in Africa and the Orient and China especially very much drew on those horrible old stereotypes, didn't they, as well?
Yeah, it's all pith helmets and coloured chaps. Yeah, it's all a bit uncomfortable reading nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Smith largely manages to avoid that, to be fair.
Yes.
I mean, he actually has his lead characters as being people of that place quite often.
Yeah, which is quite unusual, really. One thing you can always count on Smith is the fact that the research will have been top notch, because you can tell the little details that he puts in.
Yeah,
just little details that it means he's done his homework.
Which we know that's something that Lovecraft was very strong on as well.
Yeah.
Certainly as far as setting and places went, although Rats in the Walls might be an exception, but
bit of a cock up there, yes.
And the same as Robert E. Howard. I'm working on a sequel to Worms of the Earth at the moment.
Yeah.
And one thing I've got to try and spin around is the fact that the Fens, where Bran McMorn goes to see the Worms of the Earth, not in the west, they're in the east.
Yeah, the east.
So
yep.
I've come up with an ingenious method, an ingenious idea. I'll run this past you, just see what you think.
Oh, excellent.
So Bran goes to the Fens, Fens. Now, the Fens is waterlogged. There's not going to be much burrowing going on in the Fens.
No.
Because when the worms of the earth, the little people, everyone will call them, start digging tunnels, they're going to get flooded.
Mm-hmm.
But if we think Arthur Machen, which is what Howard was drawing from, the little people in Wales. What are the mountains in Wales called? The Fens.
No.
So you see, it's just there was a slight mistranslation.
Right.
Bran didn't go to the Fens, he went to the Fens.
Right. I like it.
I'm sticking by it.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect. That's spot on. Yeah, because that's the thing that got me when I was reading that story. We discussed it at the time, was the fact that like the Welsh mountains are the exact opposite of the Fens. You know, it's like as flat as a fucking billiard table.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, the total opposite sides of the country, totally opposite types of terrain. So there we go. I was quite pleased with myself at that.
Right, yeah, that's pretty much it for those two stories, isn't it? Right. Before we start to wrap up, we've got a couple of messages to go through. This first one is from YouTube, and it's from Michael Kotler, and it was sent to us 10 days ago. It's a Innsmouth Book Club, the perfect name for a channel devoted to Clark Ashton Smith, Lovecraft, Leiber, Howard, et al., and contender for the cleverest channel name ever, not to be missed. IBC is a deeply edifying and endlessly entertaining show. The story info, references to, and details about authors included but not limited to Lovecraft, Leiber, Clark Ashton Smith, and so on are fantastic. Too speechless even for cursing, he says. Nice. And that's just one of the endless trivia zingers here. Cool guest, and again, a fun, engaging, and edifying show indeed. How this has only 5 comments is itself a comment on the general dumbing down of humanity. I couldn't agree more. This channel should have at least 100,000 subscribers. The appeal here for fans of the mythos is undeniable, and in addition to being fun, a listener can gain many insights from giving this material a listen. In short, an amazing show. Cheers from the crazy AF States. Thank you very much, Michael. That was really appreciated.
Yeah, that's really nice, Michael. Thanks a lot for that. And well, yeah, what can we say? I mean, we'd love more subscribers and more guests and everything else. And of course, we'd like to thank everyone who's subscribing on YouTube at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
We are picking up quite regularly. Every month we get a new batch of subscribers on YouTube.
Oh, that's good.
And I think, as I said before, we are also available on all these other platforms as well, which are a complete mystery to us. I think Apple and Amazon and I don't know, Stitch.
Kobo and I don't know. Anchor, is that another one?
I think so, yeah. And you can leave reviews on those, so please do that and spread the word. And of course, as we mentioned at the top of the show, you can now join as a patron on Buzzsprout and also, of course, on our Patreon site. We just had one other message in as well. Now, last time I was talking about this phrase, which will scarcely be believed, and A.T. Johnson got in touch via Patreon to say, were you talking about the Robert E. Howard poem, which will scarcely be understood? Yes, that's exactly the one. So thanks for that, A.T.
Well done.
And I'll just quickly, it's quite a long poem, but the first opening stanza goes, small poets sing of little foolish things as more befitting to a shallow brain that dreams not of pre-Atlantean kings, nor launches on that dark uncharted main that holds grim islands and unholy tides, where many a black mysterious secret hides. So we'll put a link up to that poem because it's one of Robert E. Howard's. Well, actually, most of his poems are good ones, but that's a particularly favourite one of mine. So thanks for that, A.T. Johnson.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed that. As always, any comments, suggestions, corrections, then or don't forget to tell us your best nightmares as well. Do let us know. You can get in touch via Facebook. You can leave a message on our Patreon page or our YouTube page. And of course, you can always send us an email at innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com. Next time, we're going to be covering 2 more stories again. We've got 2 more fairly short ones. And these 2 have got excellent titles.
They do indeed. The first one is The Ghoul, and the second one is The Kingdom of the Worm. Just brilliant.
That's a title for a weird tale, isn't it? The Kingdom of the Worm. That's great. Looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
So we hope you can join us for those next time. Thanks for listening. And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.